When Nicholas Carter pushed Natalie against the door and devoured her with a kiss filled with years of pent-up desire, she finally understood. This man wasn't there by chance. He came back because he couldn't forget her. 4 years trying to erase her scent from his memory, the accidental touch on the train, the look that promised fire. But that night, he arrived angry, hungry, thirsty for pleasure. And she was ready to be consumed by all that longing. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, click the super thanks button too. Comment where you're listening from. We love knowing you're there with us. The cold cut through Natalie's skin as she climbed the steps of the Grand Central Station platform. The wind carried the smell of rain and metal, mixed with the exhaust from taxis waiting on the street. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything she was leaving behind. A failed marriage, a broken heart, a life that had crumbled like dry leaves beneath her feet. She pulled her coat closer to her body and walked toward the train bound for North Haven, her hair loose and wild in the wind. The fabric of her life had unraveled, thread by thread, until she was left with only the sharp edges of her own mistakes. But today, she told herself, today was the first step towards something different, something new. Inside the car, the air was warm and thick, smelling of old upholstery and reheated coffee. Passengers were scattered in groups, some reading, others staring at their phone screens with empty looks. Natalie's eyes scanned the rows, searching for an empty seat, some quiet corner where she could disappear into her own thoughts. And then she saw him. He sat by the window, his broad shoulders filling the space as if he owned it. A black suit, perfectly tailored, stretched across his body. His hands were folded in his lap with a kind of rigid control, as if he were holding something dangerous. His jaw was tense, his expression unreadable. Dark hair, sharp features, and eyes that stared at the city passing on the other side of the window with an intensity that made her chest tighten. Nicholas Carter. She didn't know his name yet, but she would never forget that face. There was an empty seat next to him. Natalie hesitated. Everything about him screamed, "Do not disturb." He was the type of man who existed in a different world, a world of power, control, and cold precision. The type of man who would never notice someone like her. But she had no choice. The train was full. She walked toward him, her heart beating harder with each step. When she reached the seat, she stopped, waiting for him to acknowledge her presence. He did nothing. "Excuse me," she said quietly, her voice barely cutting through the noise of the train. "Is this seat taken?" He turned his head slowly, and for the first time, their eyes met. Time stopped. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they held her with a force that made her forget how to breathe. There was something raw in that look, something hungry and contained at the same time. It wasn't just a look. It was a claim. Natalie felt heat rise to her cheeks. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Something invisible held her there, suspended in the gravity of that gaze. He said nothing. He just made a subtle gesture toward the empty seat. She sat down, her body suddenly hyper-aware of everything. The way her shoulder brushed against his as she settled in, the heat radiating from his body, the subtle scent of cologne, something woody and dark that made her pulse quicken. The train lurched forward and the city began to blur outside the window. The silence stretched between them, thick and electric. Natalie tried to focus on anything else. The rhythm of the tracks, the muffled conversations around them, the announcements crackling through the speakers. But all she could feel was him, the solid presence of his body next to hers, the way he stayed so still, yet somehow seemed like a barely contained storm. She glanced at him sideways. His jaw was clenched, his hands still folded with that same tight control. But there was tension in his posture now, a subtle shift that told her he felt it too. Minutes passed. Neither of them spoke. But then, when the train swayed around a curve, her shoulder pressed against his again. This time he didn't pull away. Neither did she. Natalie's breath faltered. It was such a small thing, just a touch, almost imperceptible to anyone else. But between them, it felt like fire. She raised her hand to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, trying to calm herself, and she felt his eyes on her. Not obviously, not invasively, just watching. He noticed the curve of her neck when she turned her head, the way her fingers moved with nervous grace, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. Nicholas tightened his hands harder. He shouldn't be paying attention, shouldn't be noticing her scent, something clean and soft with a hint of flowers and soap that reached him like a whisper. Shouldn't be feeling the warmth of her body so close to his. But he was. And it irritated him. He had built an entire empire on control, on never letting anything into or anyone throw him off balance. And yet this woman, this stranger beside him, was doing exactly that without even trying. Natalie cleared her throat, her soft voice cutting through the silence. Does this line go to North Haven? The question was simple, innocent. But when she spoke, Nicholas felt something give way inside him. He turned his face completely this time, his eyes meeting hers again. And this time he really looked. She was beautiful, not in the obvious polished way he was used to seeing. She was beautiful in a real way, with eyes that carried stories, lips that trembled slightly as she waited for his answer, and a vulnerability that hit him like a punch to the gut. Yes, he answered, his voice rougher than he intended. It does, she smiled. Just a small smile, shy and relieved. But it was enough to make his chest tighten in a way he didn't understand. Thank you, she murmured, looking away. But he couldn't look away. The rest of the ride passed in a blur of unspoken tension. Sometimes, when the train swayed, their bodies touched. Sometimes, she sighed softly, and he held his breath. Sometimes, he adjusted his tie and she watched the movement of his hands with more attention than she should. Nothing happened, but everything happened. When the train finally began to slow as it approached North Haven, Nicholas felt something strange, something he hadn't felt in years, reluctance. He didn't want her to leave, didn't want that moment to end. Natalie stood up, grabbing her bag. She looked at him one last time, her eyes searching his as if she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She just smiled, small, sad, full of unspoken things, and walked away. Nicholas sat there watching as she disappeared into the crowd on the platform, and for the first time in years, he missed someone who had never been his. 5 days had passed since that encounter on the train. 5 days in which Nicholas Carter had tried, and failed miserably, to get Natalie out of his head. He sat in his office in the heart of Manhattan, surrounded by glass walls that offered a panoramic view of the city, papers scattered across the mahogany desk, financial reports, contracts awaiting his signature, but none of it mattered. His mind was stuck in that train car, reliving every second of that charged silence, her scent, the accidental touch, the shy smile. He ran his hand over his face, frustrated with himself. This was ridiculous. He'd known the woman for less than an hour, didn't even know her name. And yet she had infiltrated his thoughts like smoke, impossible to hold, impossible to forget. Nicholas stood abruptly from his chair. He needed to get out, needed air, needed a distraction. He grabbed his coat and left the building, walking without direction through the busy streets of New York. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink, but he barely noticed. His steps led him through familiar alleys, past crowded cafes, until he found himself standing in front of a restaurant he rarely frequented. An upscale place, discreet, with low lighting and soft music. Perfect for forgetting. He walked in. The maitre d' recognized him immediately and led him to a table in the back, away from curious eyes. Nicholas sat down, ordered an expensive bottle of red wine, something that would normally calm him, and flipped through the menu without really reading anything. The restaurant was busy but not packed. The sound of silverware against plates, low conversations, discreet laughter. Everything seemed normal, controlled, predictable, until she walked in. Natalie pushed through the kitchen door with her shoulder, balancing a tray full of hot plates. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she wore a simple apron over a white blouse. There was a sauce stain on her sleeve. Her eyes were focused, concentrated, as she moved between tables with silent efficiency. Nicholas felt the air leave his lungs. It was her. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on her as she worked. She hadn't seen him yet. Didn't know he was there, watching her every move like a starving man watches food. She smiled at a customer, took down an order, poured water with steady hands. There was a grace to her, a quiet strength that hit him harder than anything he'd ever felt. And then she turned and saw him. Her eyes widened. The tray nearly slipped from her hands. For a moment, she was completely still, as if she'd seen a ghost. Nicholas didn't move, just watched her, his dark eyes locked on hers across the space between them. Time stopped. Again. Natalie swallowed hard, forcing herself to move. She placed the empty tray on a side table and took a deep breath, trying to calm the heart that was beating wildly in her chest. He's here. Why? How? She didn't know. But something inside her, something dangerous and reckless, pushed her toward his table. Nicholas watched her approach. Every step, every breath. When she finally stopped beside the table, their eyes met again, and all the professional composure she'd tried to gather crumbled. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Would you like something to drink while you decide?" Nicholas tilted his head, his lips curving into a slow, dangerous smile. "Yes," he answered, his voice low and rough. He looked at her, really looked, as if he were memorizing every feature of her face. "I want you." The words stuck in his throat, burning like fire. "A red wine," he finished, his voice more controlled now. Natalie nodded quickly, her breath caught. She wrote down the order with trembling hands and walked away before he could see the flush rising up her neck. But Nicholas saw. He saw everything. He watched her as she returned to the kitchen, the way she looked back once, just once, before disappearing through the door. And he knew. She'd been thinking about him too. For the rest of the night, Nicholas couldn't take his eyes off her. He ordered dish after dish, prolonging the meal just to have her near. Every time she approached the table, the air grew heavier, more charged. He noticed everything. The way she bit her lower lip when she was nervous, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she poured the wine, the way she avoided looking directly at him, as if she knew that if she did, she'd lose control. At one point, when she leaned in to pick up an empty plate, her scent, that same clean, soft scent that had haunted him for days, wrapped around Nicholas like a physical memory. He closed his eyes for a second, just breathing. When she pulled away, he realized his hands were clenched into fists on the table, his knuckles white. He wanted her, in a way that wasn't rational, in a way that made no sense. And for the first time in his life, Nicholas Carter had no control. The hours passed. The restaurant began to empty. One by one, customers left until only a few tables remained occupied. Nicholas finished his meal but didn't get up. He stayed there, drinking the wine slowly, waiting for her. Finally, when her shift was almost over, Natalie approached his table one last time. "Can I bring you anything else?" she asked, her voice careful. Nicholas looked at her for a long moment. There were so many things he wanted to say, so many things he wanted to ask. "Who are you? Why can't I stop thinking about you? What did you do to me on that train?" But he said none of that. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "What's your name?" Natalie blinked, surprised by the direct question. "Natalie," she answered quietly. "Natalie," he repeated as if savoring every syllable. "I'm Nicholas." She nodded, but said nothing. He reached into his jacket's inner pocket and pulled out a business card, placing it on the table. "I have a proposal for you." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of proposal?" "A job," he said simply. "Something better than this." Natalie looked at the card but didn't pick it up. "Why?" "Why not?" he replied, his voice soft but firm. She shook her head, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that surprised him. "You don't know me, don't know anything about me. So why would you offer me something like this?" Nicholas smiled, a small, dangerous smile, full of unspoken things. "Maybe I want to know you." The air between them grew thick, hot. Natalie took a step back, her heart beating so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I appreciate it," she said, her voice steady, despite the storm inside her. "But I'm not for sale." Nicholas tilted his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "That's not what I was suggesting." Then what were you suggesting? He didn't answer immediately, just looked at her, as if trying to read every thought passing through her mind. A chance, he said finally. For you. For us. Us. The word hung in the air like a dangerous promise. Natalie swallowed hard. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe this was real, but she'd been burned before, had trusted before, and only ashes remained. You don't know me, she repeated, her voice softer now. No, Nicholas admitted, but I want to. She looked at him for one more moment, a long, loaded moment, full of possibilities and dangers, before walking away. Good night, Mr. Carter. And then she was gone. Nicholas sat alone at the table, the business card still untouched on the surface. He should be frustrated, should be irritated, but all he felt was admiration. She'd rejected him, she'd said no, and somehow that only made him want her more. He stood up, left money on the table and walked out into the cold night. But he knew, with every fiber of his being, that this wasn't over. He'd be back. The night was freezing when Natalie finally left the restaurant. The air cut through her exposed skin, making her hunch her shoulders and pull her thin coat tighter against her body. Her feet ached after hours of standing, and all she wanted was to get home, take off her shoes, and forget that impossible encounter. But forgetting Nicholas Carter was like trying to erase the sun. She walked down the dark sidewalk, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the nearly empty street. The streetlights cast long shadows on the ground, and the wind carried the distant smell of approaching rain. And then she saw him. He was leaning against a luxurious black car, his hands in his pockets, his suit still impeccable despite the late hour. The dim light from the street lamp illuminated half his face, making him even more intimidating, more irresistible. Natalie stopped mid-stride, her heart racing. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. Nicholas pushed off from the car and took a few steps toward her, closing the distance between them with an ease that made her instinctively step back. "Waiting for you," he answered simply. "Why?" He stopped just inches from her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body despite the cold night. So close she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Because you didn't take my card," he said, his voice low and controlled. "And because I wasn't finished talking." Natalie crossed her arms over her chest, as much to protect herself from the cold as to create a barrier between them. "I said I wasn't interested." "You said you weren't for sale," he corrected, his dark eyes studying every nuance of her expression. "That's different." "Not to me." Nicholas took another step closer. Now she could smell his cologne, that woody, dark scent that had been etched in her memory since the train. She hated how much it affected her. "Natalie," he said her name slowly, as if savoring each letter. "I'm not trying to buy you. I'm trying to offer you something you deserve." "You don't know me," she shot back, her voice gaining strength now. "You don't know what I deserve or don't deserve." "Then let me know you." The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. She looked at him, searching for signs of manipulation, of fakeness, of anything that would justify her defenses. But all she saw was intensity, desire, something dangerously close to truth. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why me? You don't know me. You've seen me twice. Why bother?" Nicholas took a deep breath, as if fighting with himself. When he spoke again, there was a vulnerability in his voice she didn't expect. "Because since you got on that train, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Because every time I close my eyes, I see your face. Because something about you," he paused, running his hand through his hair in frustration, "made me feel something I haven't felt in years, maybe never felt." Natalie's heart beat harder. She wanted to believe. God, how she wanted to believe. But she'd heard pretty words before, had believed in promises before, and she'd paid the price. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "I can't do this." "Why?" "Because men like you don't show up in the lives of women like me, offering worlds without wanting something in return." The pain that crossed his face was so real, she almost stepped back. "I'm not him," Nicholas said, his voice harder now. Natalie blinked, surprised. Who? Whoever made you believe you don't deserve more? The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. Not now. You don't know anything about me, she repeated, but this time her voice came out broken. Then tell me, he pleaded, taking another step. Now they were so close she could see the golden flecks in his dark eyes. Let me in, Natalie. She shook her head, stepping back. I can't. Why not? Because I'm scared. The words came out in a muffled cry, surprised by her own honesty. I'm scared of believing you and finding out it was a lie. I'm scared of opening up and being destroyed again. I'm scared of feeling what I'm feeling right now because this, she gestured between them. This isn't real, it can't be. Nicholas closed his eyes for a moment, as if her words had physically hurt him. When he opened them again, there was a fierce determination in them. It's real, he said with conviction. I don't know what this is, can't explain it, but it's real, Natalie, and you feel it too. I know you do. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. That doesn't change anything, she said, her voice tired now. I can't accept your money, can't accept your job, can't accept you. Why not? Because I have responsibilities. I have a life. I have... She stopped abruptly, realizing she was about to reveal too much. Nicholas frowned. Have what? Natalie shook her head, taking another step back. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. It shouldn't. Silence fell between them, heavy and painful. The wind blew harder, making her loose hair whip around her face. Nicholas instinctively reached out as if to brush the strand from her eyes, but stopped mid-motion, letting his hand fall back to his side. Natalie, he said, his voice softer now. I'm not asking you to trust me completely. Not yet. I'm just asking for a chance. A coffee. A conversation. Let me prove I'm not who you think I am. She looked at him for a long moment. Part of her, the rational part, the part that had been hurt and knew how to survive, screamed at her to leave, to run, to protect herself. But there was another part, a smaller, quieter, more dangerous part. The part that wanted to believe in fairy tales. The part that looked at Nicholas Carter and saw not just a rich, powerful man, but someone who maybe, just maybe, could see her. I can't, she said finally, her voice firm despite the storm inside her. I'm sorry, Nicholas, but I can't. She turned and started walking, forcing her legs to move even when every fiber of her being screamed at her to stay. Natalie, he called behind her. She didn't stop. Please, he said, and there was something in his voice, something broken, something vulnerable, that almost made her turn back. Almost. But she kept walking. One step, then another, until the distance between them turned into yards, and then a corner, and then she was out of sight. Nicholas stood on the empty street, the freezing wind cutting through his expensive suit. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tense. He should let it go, should accept the rejection and move on. But Nicholas Carter wasn't a man who accepted defeat easily, especially not when it came to something, to someone, he wanted with every fiber of his being. He ran his hand over the back of his neck, frustrated, but also alive. For the first time in years, he felt completely, painfully alive, and all because of her. He got into the car and closed the door, but didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, he sat in the silence, staring at the empty street where she'd disappeared. This isn't over, Natalie, he murmured to himself, not even close. And somewhere in the darkness of the night, Natalie leaned against the wall of a building, her hand pressed against her chest, trying to calm the heart that was beating wildly. She'd done the right thing, had protected herself. So why did it feel like she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life? 4 years, 1,460 days, 35,040 hours. Nicholas Carter had counted every single one. He sat in his office atop a Manhattan skyscraper. The city sprawled below him like an illuminated chessboard. His empire had grown. More deals, more money, more power. He had everything a man could want, except the one thing that mattered, her. He swiveled his chair toward the window, watching the city lights flicker in the darkness. How many times had he thought about looking for her? How many times had he picked up the phone, ready to hire a private investigator who could find her in minutes? But he never did, because she'd asked to be left alone. And despite everything, despite the pain, the desire, the frustration that consumed him, he'd respected that. But respecting didn't mean forgetting, and God knew he'd tried to forget. In the first months after that night, Nicholas had thrown himself into work with an intensity that worried even his closest associates. He worked 18-hour days, closed impossible deals, built agreements other men wouldn't even dream of attempting. Anything to not think about her. But at night, when he was alone in his empty apartment, she came back. The image of her on the train, with her hair loose and her eyes searching for his. Her scent, clean, soft, with a hint of flowers that seemed permanently etched in his olfactory memory. The sound of her voice saying his name, Nicholas. The way she'd stepped back when he got too close, but with her eyes saying she wanted him to stay. He tried other women. God, how he tried. There was Lauren, the sophisticated lawyer who understood his world. Dinner at expensive restaurants, intelligent conversations, a relationship that made sense on paper. But when he kissed her, all he felt was nothing. There was Sophia, the model who appeared on magazine covers. Beautiful, confident, the kind of woman any man would want. But when she touched his face, he closed his eyes and saw Natalie. There were others, many others, women who wanted his money, his power, his name. But none of them wanted him. Not the way she had, with fear, yes, but also with a raw honesty that had destroyed him. Every time he was with another woman, it was Natalie's face that surfaced in his mind. Her breathing, the strand of hair falling over her eyes, the way she'd bitten her lower lip when she was nervous. He stopped trying after a year, stopped forcing connections that didn't exist, stopped pretending he could replace her. Because the truth, the painful, inescapable truth, was that Natalie had infiltrated so deep into his soul that there was no room for anyone else. Nicholas picked up the glass of whiskey on his desk and swirled it slowly, watching the amber liquid catch the light. He'd become colder over the years, more distant. His employees walked on eggshells around him. His business partners called him ruthless. And he was, because he'd learned that feeling was dangerous, that wanting was weakness. But then, 3 days ago, something had changed. He'd received a business proposal in North Haven, a small coastal town he hadn't visited in, how long? 4 years. Exactly 4 years. At first, he'd declined. It wasn't worth his personal attention. He could send an associate. But then, late at night, when he was alone with his thoughts and his demons, he'd changed his mind. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was madness. Or maybe he simply needed to know. Is she still there? Does she think about me? Does she remember that night the way I remember it? And so, 3 days later, Nicholas Carter found himself driving through the quiet streets of North Haven, his heart beating in a way it hadn't in years. The town was small, quaint, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and time seemed to move slower. There was a main square with charming shops, cozy cafes, and a harbor where boats gently swayed in the water. It was as different from Manhattan as possible, and for some reason that made him smile. He parked the car and got out, breathing in the salty sea air. There was something liberating about being here, away from the skyscrapers, the board meetings, the expectations. He walked without direction, his hands in his pockets, watching life happen around him, children laughing, couples holding hands, elderly people sitting on benches, feeding pigeons. And then he saw it, or rather saw the sign. April's Corner, Cafe and Bakery. The name meant nothing to him, but something, intuition, fate, or pure stubbornness of the universe, pulled him toward the door. He walked in. The smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee enveloped him immediately. The interior was cozy, with wooden tables, comfortable chairs, and soft light filtering through lace curtains. There were fresh flowers in small vases on each table. Soft music played in the background. It was warm, inviting, safe. And then he saw her. Natalie was behind the counter, laughing at something a customer had said. Her hair was longer now, falling in loose waves over her shoulders. She wore a simple apron over a light blue dress. There was flour on her cheek. And she was more beautiful than he remembered. Time stopped. The entire world, every sound, every movement, every breath, disappeared. All that existed was her. Natalie picked up a cup and began pouring coffee, still talking to the customer. And then, as if sensing the weight of his gaze, she looked up. Their eyes met across the cafe, and Nicholas saw the exact moment she recognized him, saw her eyes widen, saw the cup tremble in her hand, saw the color rise to her cheeks. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They just looked at each other, bridging 4 years of silence, of longing, of unanswered questions. And then, to Nicholas's absolute surprise, she smiled. Not a small, shy smile like before, but a real warm smile that lit up her entire face. And something inside his chest, something that had been frozen for 4 long, lonely years, finally began to thaw. She finished serving the customer and walked toward him, wiping her hands on her apron. There was caution in her steps, but also curiosity, maybe even joy. "Nicholas," she said, when she finally stopped in front of him, her voice softer than he remembered. "Natalie," he responded, and just saying her name out loud after so long made something loosen inside him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, but there was no accusation in her voice, just genuine surprise. "Business," he lied. Or maybe it wasn't a lie. Maybe she was the business. She nodded slowly, her eyes studying his face as if searching for changes. "You look different," she said. "So do you," he replied. "Stronger." She smiled again, and this time there was a touch of sadness in it. "I had to be." Silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, yes, full of unspoken things, but it wasn't the painful silence of 4 years ago. "Do you want some coffee?" she finally asked. Nicholas nodded. "I'd love some." She turned to prepare it, and he watched her move with familiarity through the space. This was her world, the place she'd built, and somehow that made him admire her even more. When she came back with a steaming cup, she hesitated before handing it to him. For a moment their fingers touched, and it was like electricity. Their eyes met again, and Nicholas saw that she'd felt it too. Saw it in the way her breath faltered, in the way she quickly pulled her hand back. 4 years, 1,460 days, and still, her touch burned him the same way. "How long will you be in town?" she asked, her voice careful. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "How long do you want me to stay?" Natalie bit her lower lip, that gesture he'd seen 1,000 times in his dreams. "I don't know if it's a good idea." "It probably isn't," he agreed. "But when have we ever done things that made sense?" She laughed, a soft, genuine sound that made his chest tighten. "Fair point." Nicholas took a sip of the coffee, but his eyes never left hers. "Have dinner with me," he said suddenly. She blinked, surprised. "What?" "Have dinner with me. Tonight. Not somewhere fancy, just conversation, catching up, see if we're still the same people." Natalie hesitated, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. Fear versus desire. Past versus possibility. Finally, she took a deep breath. "Okay," she said, so quietly he almost didn't hear. But he heard. And for the first time in 4 years, Nicholas Carter felt something he'd forgotten how to feel. Hope. Nicholas arrived to pick her up at 7 in the evening. Natalie had spent the last 3 hours getting ready, taking off clothes, putting them back on, changing her hair, redoing her makeup. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been this nervous about a man. Lie. You know exactly when it was. 4 years ago. When the doorbell rang, she took a deep breath and opened the door, and forgot how to breathe. Nicholas stood on the threshold, wearing dark jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. No tie, no suit. Just him, more casual, more accessible, but somehow even more devastating. His eyes traveled slowly over her body, absorbing every detail. The simple wine-colored dress she'd chosen, her hair loose, falling over her shoulders. The subtle lipstick. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough. Natalie felt heat rise up her neck. "Thank you," she murmured. "You look different too." He smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I thought I'd leave the Billionaire at home tonight. Just brought the man." She couldn't help the smile that appeared on her lips. I think I can handle that. They went to his car. Something simpler this time, not the expensive, intimidating machine from 4 years ago. He opened the door for her, and when she passed by him, his scent, that woody, dark smell, wrapped around her like a physical memory. The restaurant he chose wasn't the kind of place she expected. There were no glamorous lights or reserved tables in VIP corners. It was a small Italian bistro tucked away on a side street, with exposed brick walls, flickering candles on the tables, and the soft sound of a live guitar. It was intimate, cozy, perfect. They sat at a corner table away from the other customers. The candlelight danced between them, creating soft shadows on each other's faces. For a moment, neither spoke. They just looked at each other, as if trying to memorize every detail that had changed over the last 4 years. "So," Nicholas began, his voice soft, "tell me, what happened in these 4 years?" Natalie took a sip of water, buying time. "I worked. A lot. Saved. Bought the cafe 2 years ago. It was hard at first, but now it's going well." "You seem happy," he observed. "I am," she replied, and it was true. "For the first time in a long time, I am." He smiled, and there was genuine pride in that smile. "I'm glad for you." "And you?" she asked. "From what I researched after you left that night, you didn't need more success, but I imagine you got even more." Nicholas laughed softly. "You researched me?" Natalie blushed. "I was curious." "Good to know I wasn't the only one," he said, his eyes meeting hers with intensity. The waiter came, breaking the moment. They ordered. Nicholas chose a wine that wasn't the most expensive on the list, and Natalie ordered simple pasta. When they were alone again, the silence returned, but it was comfortable now. "Can I ask you something?" Nicholas said after a moment. "Depends on the question. Why did you say no that night?" "The truth." Natalie looked at her hands on the table. "Because I was scared. Of you, of what you represented, of what I felt when I was near you. And now," she raised her eyes to meet his, "I'm still scared," she admitted, "but maybe a little less." Nicholas slowly extended his hand across the table, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. When she didn't move, he touched her fingers, just the tips, light as a feather. But the electricity that passed between them was anything but light. "I thought about you every day," he said, his voice low and intense. "Every single day." Natalie held her breath. "Nicholas?" "No," he interrupted gently. "Let me say this, because I need you to know. I tried to forget, tried to move on. But you became part of me that night, and I don't know how to undo that. Don't know if I want to." Tears burned behind her eyes. "I thought about you too," she confessed, her voice trembling, "more than I should have, more than was safe." His fingers intertwined with hers on the table, and this time she didn't pull away. "Then let's stop fighting this," he said. "Let's see what happens when we stop being afraid." She looked at their intertwined fingers, at the way his large hand wrapped around hers carefully. "I have something I need to tell you," she said suddenly. Nicholas frowned slightly, but didn't let go of her hand. "What?" Natalie took a deep breath. It was now or never. "I have a son." The silence that followed was deafening. She forced herself to look at him, searching for signs of rejection, disappointment, anything that would confirm her worst fears. But what she saw was surprise, and then slowly, understanding. "How old?" he asked, his voice careful. 5. His name is Oliver." "The father?" "Isn't in our lives," she said quickly. "Hasn't been since before he was born. He hurt me. A lot. That's why I ran to North Haven. To start over. To give my son a chance to grow up without fear." Nicholas squeezed her hand tighter, and she saw his jaw clench. "Did he touch you?" The question came out as a low growl, loaded with a protective anger that surprised her. "Not the way you're thinking," she said quickly. "But he destroyed me in other ways, with words, with control. By making me believe I was worthless." "You're worth everything," Nicholas said fiercely, his eyes locked on hers. "You hear me? Everything." A tear escaped, running down her cheek. Nicholas released her hand just long enough to lean across the table and wipe the tear away with his thumb, the touch so gentle it made her heart ache. "I don't want Oliver to be a burden to you," she whispered. "If this changes things..." It does, he interrupted. Her heart sank until he continued. It makes me admire you even more, makes me understand why you're so strong, makes me want to know that part of your life too. Because he's part of you, and I want everything that comes with you, Natalie. Everything. She let the tears fall freely now, not caring anymore about hiding them. How can you say that? You barely know me. Then let me know you, he said, echoing the words from 4 years ago. For real this time. Without fear. Without running. The waiter returned with the food, and they pulled back, wiping tears and trying to recompose their expressions. But when they were alone again, Nicholas reached out his hand again, and this time she took it without hesitation. They ate slowly, talking about small and big things. He told her about the weight of building an empire alone. She told him about the sleepless nights with a newborn baby. He spoke about the loneliness that came with success. She spoke about the fear of not being enough. And somewhere between the wine and dessert, between the laughter and the comfortable silences, something changed. Defenses fell, walls crumbled, and they simply as were. After dinner, they walked along the harbor boardwalk. The moon was full, reflecting on the dark water. The sound of the waves created a perfect soundtrack for the moment. Nicholas stopped in a darker area, away from the streetlights. He turned to her, his hands in his pockets, as if forcing himself not to touch her. "Can I do something?" he asked, his voice rough. "What?" Instead of answering, he slowly raised his hand and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered there a second longer than necessary, tracing the line of her jaw. Natalie closed her eyes, leaning into the touch. "You're so beautiful," he murmured. "Not just on the outside, inside, your strength, your courage, the way you love your son, the way you rebuilt your life. Everything about you is perfect." "I'm not perfect," she whispered. "You are to me." She opened her eyes and found him looking at her with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. "Nicholas, can I kiss you?" he asked, and the vulnerability in his voice and the fact that he was asking and completely undid her. Instead of answering, she leaned forward, and finally, their lips met. The kiss was gentle at first, exploratory, as if they were savoring the moment that had taken 4 years to happen. But then she sighed against his mouth, and something broke. Nicholas pulled her closer, one hand going to her waist, the other burying itself in her hair. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, more desperate. She grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer, needing to feel his body against hers. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Nicholas rested his forehead against hers, his eyes still closed. "Worth the wait," he murmured. Natalie laughed softly, the sound mixed with something that might have been a sob. "Yes," she agreed. It was. They stayed like that for a long moment, embraced in the darkness, with only the moon as witness. And for the first time in 4 years, both felt they were exactly where they should be. The days that followed that dinner were like waking from a dream and realizing reality was even better. Nicholas didn't go back to Manhattan. He cancelled meetings, postponed commitments, and for the first time in his adult life put something else, someone, above business. And that person was Natalie. They saw each other every day, sometimes at her cafe, where he'd sit in the corner and watch her work, admiring the way she treated each customer with genuine kindness. Other times, they walked along the harbor at sunset, talking about everything and nothing. But there was one piece of the puzzle Nicholas still hadn't met. Oliver. Natalie had talked about him, had shown photos, had told stories that made Nicholas laugh and sometimes feel a pang of something that looked dangerously like envy. Not of the boy, but of the time he had with her, of the moments Nicholas had missed. And then, a week after that first dinner, Natalie extended the invitation. "Do you want to come have dinner at my place tonight?" she asked, her hands nervously adjusting her apron. "Oliver wants to meet you. He knows you're important to me." Nicholas's heart beat harder. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted with a trembling smile, "but I want to do it anyway." Nicholas arrived at 6:30 with a bouquet of flowers for Natalie and a toy fire truck for Oliver, something he'd spent an hour choosing at a store, completely lost but determined to get it right. When Natalie opened the door, she was wearing jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She'd never looked more beautiful. "Hi," she said, smiling. "Hi," he replied, handing her the flowers, and then a small figure appeared behind her. Oliver was thin, with tousled brown hair and big, curious eyes, the same eyes as his mother. He held a teddy bear in one hand and wore pajamas with a dinosaur print. "Are you Nicholas?" the boy asked with the brutal honesty of children. Nicholas crouched down to his level. "I am. And you must be Oliver." "Uh-huh," the boy nodded. "Mommy said you're nice." Nicholas looked at Natalie over the boy's head and she blushed. "Did she now?" he asked, turning his attention back to Oliver. "Yeah. She also said you make her smile. She didn't smile much before." The simplicity of the statement hit Nicholas like a punch. He looked at Natalie again and saw tears shining in her eyes. "Well," Nicholas said, returning to Oliver, "your mum makes me smile too, so I guess we're even." Oliver considered this for a moment, then extended his small hand. "Okay, you can stay." Nicholas laughed and shook the boy's hand seriously. "Thank you, that means a lot." He handed the fire truck to Oliver, whose eyes lit up like fireworks. "Whoa! Mommy, look, it has real working lights." Dinner was perfect. They ate pizza that Natalie had made at home, and Oliver talked non-stop about dinosaurs, his teacher, and how he wanted a dog, but Mommy said they needed to wait. Nicholas listened with genuine attention, asking questions, laughing at the right moments, and Natalie watched the two of them interact with a heart so full it hurt. After Oliver went to bed, not without first making Nicholas promise he'd come back, Natalie and Nicholas were alone in the small living room. She sat on the couch and he sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her body, but still maintaining a respectful distance. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being so good with him." "You don't need to thank me," Nicholas replied. "He's amazing, Natalie. You raised an amazing boy." "I had to," she said, her voice growing heavier. "I didn't have a choice." Nicholas turned to look at her fully. "Tell me about his father, about what happened, if you want to, of course." Natalie took a deep breath. She knew this conversation would come eventually. And if there was going to be a future with Nicholas, and God she wanted there to be, he deserved to know the truth. "His name is Marcus," she began, her eyes fixed on her own hands. "We met when I was 22. I was young, naive, and he was charming, confident. He made me feel special." Nicholas listened in silence, his jaw growing tenser with each word. At first it was good. He was attentive, romantic. But then, slowly, things changed. He started telling me how to dress, who I could talk to, where I could go, and always with a smile, always saying it was because he loved me, because he wanted to protect me. She paused, wiping away a tear that had escaped. "When I found out I was pregnant, I thought things would get better, that he'd be happy, but he was furious, said I'd ruined his life, that I'd done it on purpose to trap him." Nicholas took her hand, squeezing hard, giving her the courage to continue. "I tried to make it work. God, how I tried. But he made me feel small, useless, like I was lucky he was still there. And then when I was 7 months along, he just left a note saying he couldn't deal with it." "Son of a bitch," Nicholas growled, anger vibrating in every syllable. "I was destroyed," Natalie continued. "Pregnant, alone, no money, no family. But then Oliver was born, and he became my reason, my strength. I knew I had to be better. For him." She finally looked at Nicholas, and what she saw in his eyes made her catch her breath. There was anger, yes, but there was also something more, something fierce and protective and absolutely unbreakable. "He's not getting near you again," Nicholas said, his voice low but loaded with promise. "Either of you. I won't allow it." "Nicholas, you can't." "I can," he interrupted, "and I will. You and Oliver. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine. Mine." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. "I don't need to be saved," Natalie said gently, touching his face. "I already saved myself, but I wouldn't mind having you by my side anyway." Nicholas turned his face to press a kiss into her palm. His eyes closed. I was so lonely before you, he confessed, his voice breaking slightly. I had everything, money, power, success, and yet I was completely empty. But you made me feel again, Natalie. Made me want to feel again. She moved closer, eliminating the distance between them. Nicholas wrapped her in his arms, pulling her against his chest. I was lonely too, she whispered against his neck. For so long. But you made me believe I could have more, that I deserved more. They stayed like that for a long moment, just holding each other, breathing together, letting vulnerability and truth wrap around them. And then Nicholas pulled back slightly, just enough to look into her eyes. I know it's early, he said. I know we're still getting to know each other. But I need you to know, there's no one else for me. Just you. Just this. For me too, she replied without hesitation. Just you. He touched her face with both hands, his thumbs tracing her cheeks. Can I kiss you? He asked, even though he already knew the answer. Please. The kiss was different this time. Slower. Deeper. Loaded not just with desire, but with silent promises. I choose you, I see you, I'm not leaving. When they pulled apart, both were trembling. Stay, Natalie whispered. Nicholas frowned. Natalie, not like that, she said quickly, blushing. Just stay here tonight, on the couch. I just don't want you to leave yet. He smiled, a soft smile full of tenderness. Okay. She brought blankets and pillows and they settled on the couch, her lying on her back, him behind her, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. Thank you, she murmured in the dark, for listening, for understanding, for staying. Nicholas kissed the top of her head. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. And there, in the silence of the night, with the sound of each other's breathing and the warmth of their intertwined bodies, both felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, wholeness, home. The weeks that followed transformed into something precious and dangerous at the same time. Nicholas extended his stay in North Haven indefinitely. He rented a small house near the harbor, nothing compared to the penthouses he was used to living in, but with an ocean view that made him breathe for the first time in years. And more importantly, it was only 5 minutes from Natalie's cafe. He created a routine. Every morning at 6:30, he showed up at the door of April's Corner before it even opened. Natalie always let him in with a sleepy smile and hair still messy from sleep. You don't have to come this early every day, she said one morning, handing him a cup of fresh coffee. Yes, I do, he replied, his eyes traveling over her face as if memorizing every detail. It's the best part of my day. And it was true. He'd sit at the counter and watch her work. Watch the way she prepared the bread, her hands covered in flour, the tip of her tongue appearing between her lips when she was concentrated. Watch how she hummed softly while arranging the tables, how she always put fresh flowers on each one. There was a grace to her, a peace. And Nicholas found himself being pulled into that orbit like a planet toward the sun. Sometimes when she passed by him carrying trays, he'd reach out and lightly touch the small of her back. Just a touch. Quick, but enough to make her stop, turn her head and look at him with those eyes that said so much without saying anything. Other times, when she reached for something on the high shelves, he'd move behind her, his body almost touching hers, and get the item for her. Thank you, she'd whisper, her voice faltering slightly. You're welcome, he'd respond, but he wouldn't pull away immediately. He'd stay there for an extra second, breathing in her scent, feeling the warmth of her body so close to his. The tension between them grew each day. Every accidental touch, every prolonged look, every loaded silence. They still hadn't slept together. Nicholas had stayed on the couch a few nights, always respecting her boundaries, always waiting for her to take the first step. But God, it was difficult. There were nights when he'd watch her lean over to grab something, and her dress would ride up slightly, revealing the curve of her thighs. There were moments when she'd laugh at something he said, her head thrown back, her neck exposed, and he had to clench his hands into fists to keep from pulling her to him and kissing every inch of that skin. And she felt it too. He saw it in the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, Saw it in the way her breathing quickened when he got too close. Saw it in the way she bit her lip when their fingers touched while handing over a cup of coffee. It was sweet torture. One afternoon, Nicholas was helping her move some heavy boxes to the storage room. They were alone. The customers had left and the cafe was about to close. He set a box on the floor and turned to grab another, but bumped into her. Natalie lost her balance and instinctively, he caught her by the waist to steady her. For a moment they were frozen, her hands resting on his chest, his hands on her waist, their bodies pressed together. Both their breathing accelerated. Their eyes met, and Nicholas saw the exact moment when her desire almost won over her control. "Nicholas," she whispered, and there was so much desire in that single word that he felt like he'd been struck. "Tell me," he murmured, his voice rough. "Tell me what you want, Natalie." She opened her mouth, but before she could answer, the doorbell rang. They pulled apart quickly, and Oliver came running in from school. "Mommy, Nicholas, look what I drew." The moment was broken, but the promise still hung in the air. Soon. The nights were even harder. Nicholas had started having dinner with them almost every night. He and Oliver had developed a ritual. After dinner, they'd build things with Legos, while Natalie washed the dishes and watched them with a smile that made Nicholas's chest tighten. "You're good with him," she said one night after Oliver had gone to sleep. They were sitting on the couch, her legs across his lap, his fingers tracing distracted circles on her ankle. "He's an amazing kid," Nicholas replied. "Makes things easy." "He adores you," she said quietly. "Yesterday he asked me if you were going to stay forever." Nicholas stopped the movement, his eyes meeting hers. "And what did you say?" "I said I didn't know," she admitted, "but that I hoped so." He slid his hand up her leg, slowly rising to her knee, watching how her breathing changed. "I'm not going anywhere," he said with conviction, "unless you ask me to." "I won't ask," she whispered. His hand moved up a little more, stopping at her thigh. Not invasively, just possessively. "Do you have any idea how much I want you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Natalie swallowed hard. "I think I have some idea." "You don't," he said, his eyes darkening. "If you did, you wouldn't be able to look at me like that without knowing what it does to me." "How am I looking at you?" she asked, even though she knew the answer. "Like you want me too. Like you're waiting for me to do something about it." "And if I am?" The question hung suspended between them, loaded with possibilities. Nicholas closed his eyes, breathing deeply, clearly fighting for control. "Natalie," he said, his voice strained, "I'm trying to do this right. I'm trying to respect your pace, but you need to stop looking at me like that or I'm going to..." "Going to what?" she challenged, leaning closer. He opened his eyes, and what she saw there made her shiver. "Take you on this couch and not stop until you're screaming my name." Heat exploded through her body. She felt her cheeks flush, but didn't look away. "Maybe that's what I want," Nicholas growled, literally growled, before pulling her onto his lap in one quick motion. Now she was straddling him, her thighs on either side of his hips, and she could feel every inch of him pressed against her. "You're going to kill me," he murmured, before capturing her mouth in a kiss that was pure hunger. There was no gentleness this time, no careful exploration. It was raw desire and urgent need. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, on her back, sliding down to grip her hips and pull her even closer. She moaned into his mouth, and the sound almost completely undid him. But then, with superhuman effort, he pulled away, both of them panting. "Not here," he said, his voice rough. "Not like this. You deserve more than that." Natalie touched his face, her eyes shining with emotion. "Are you real?" she asked, echoing the words he'd said that first night. He smiled, a small smile but full of promises. "Always have been yours." She kissed him again, softer this time. A promise, a guarantee. "Soon," she whispered against his lips. "Soon," he agreed. And both knew that soon was coming faster than they imagined. The tension was unbearable now. Every touch was a promise of what was to come. Every look was a silent invitation. And when Nicholas finally left that night, walking home under the stars, he knew with absolute certainty. When Natalie finally let him in completely, not just into her life, but into her body, into her soul, there would be no going back. They would be one, Forever. Nicholas was having a hellish day. The video conference with his partners in Manhattan had dragged on for hours. Problems with a contract, threats of lawsuits, numbers that didn't add up. Everything demanded his immediate attention, but his mind was miles away. It was with her. When he finally hung up the last call, it was almost 10 at night. He was tense, frustrated, and something else he couldn't name burned in his veins. Hunger. Not for food, for her, for Natalie, for everything they'd been building and postponing for weeks. He didn't think, just grabbed his car keys and drove. When he arrived at her house, all the lights were off, except the one in the living room. Oliver was already asleep. Nicholas knew her routine now, knew everything about her, every detail, every habit. He knocked on the door, 3 firm knocks. There was a pause. He heard footsteps. And then the door opened. Natalie stood there, wearing a simple cotton nightgown that went to her knees. Her hair was loose, still damp from the shower. No makeup, bare feet. Beautiful in a way that made his chest tighten. But it was her look that undid him. She saw him, really saw him, and her eyes widened, not with fear, with recognition. She knew from the way he stood there, from the tension in his shoulders, from the way his eyes devoured her. He came for her, only for her. "Nicholas," she began, but he stepped inside, closing the door behind him and gently pressing her against it. "Don't speak," he murmured, his voice rough and dangerous. "Unless it's to tell me to leave." She said nothing, just looked at him with those eyes that said everything he needed to know. "Stay. Touch me. Make me yours." He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. But she didn't pull back. Instead, she leaned forward, meeting him halfway. The kiss was explosive. There was no gentleness, no hesitation. It was years of pent-up desire breaking free all at once. He kissed her like a starving man would kiss his last piece of bread, with urgency, with need, with a hunger that nothing else could satisfy. Natalie moaned against his mouth, her hands rising to grip his hair, pulling him closer. More. Always more. Nicholas lifted her, and instinctively she wrapped her legs around his waist. He carried her through the room, bumping into furniture, not caring, until they reached her bedroom. He placed her on the bed with a reverence that contrasted with the urgency of moments before. "Are you real?" he asked, echoing her words from so many weeks ago, his eyes traveling over every inch of her body. "Always have been yours," she replied, echoing his words. Something broke inside Nicholas, the last piece of control he had dissolved. He leaned over her, capturing her mouth again while his hands explored. He touched her face, her neck, descended along the curves of her body over the thin fabric of the nightgown. Natalie arched against him, each touch igniting nerve endings she didn't even know existed. It had been so long since anyone had touched her like this, since anyone had seen her like this. Nicholas pulled back for a moment, his dark eyes locked on hers. "If you want to stop, tell me now," he said, his voice strained with the effort of control. "Because if we continue, there's no going back, Natalie. You'll be mine. Completely." She touched his face, her eyes shining with tears that weren't from sadness, but from something deeper. "I'm already yours," she whispered. "Always have been, since that train, since that first look." He closed his eyes as if her words were an answered prayer. And then he began. Slowly, so slowly it was almost torture. He unbuttoned her nightgown button by button, kissing every inch of skin that was revealed. Her collarbone, the valley between her breasts, the curve of her stomach. Natalie trembled beneath him, her hands clutching the sheets, trying to anchor herself to something while he undid her with each touch. When the nightgown finally fell away completely, he stopped and just looked. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said with reverence. She blushed under his intense gaze but didn't cover herself, didn't hide. For the first time in years, she felt seen, desired, loved. Nicholas removed his own shirt, and now it was her turn to look. His body was firm, sculpted, with scars that told stories she didn't know yet but wanted to learn. She reached out and traced a line over his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and fast beneath her palm. "Are you scared?" she asked quietly. Terrified, he admitted. I'm terrified of hurting you, of not being enough, of ruining this. You won't, she promised. You never could. He lay over her, the weight of his body a perfect anchor. And then he kissed her again, more deeply this time, while his hands continued their exploration. He touched every part of her, memorized every curve, every scar, every mark that life had left on her body. And she did the same with him, explored, discovered, worshipped. When he finally moved to position himself between her legs, he stopped again, his eyes meeting hers. Look at me, he said, his voice rough. I need you to see me when I make you mine. She held his face with both hands. I see you, she whispered. I always have. And then he entered, slowly, so slowly that both trembled with the effort of control. Natalie gasped, her eyes closing with the intensity. Look at me, he reminded her, and she obeyed. Their eyes met and locked, and there in that moment something changed, something deep and irrevocable. They were no longer two separate people. They were one. Nicholas began to move, establishing a rhythm that was both urgent and reverent. Each movement was a promise. Each touch was a declaration. You're mine, I'm yours always. Natalie moved with him, their bodies finding perfect synchronicity, as if they'd been made to fit together exactly like this. She moaned his name when the pressure began to build. He kissed every sound that came from her mouth, drinking her surrender like water in the desert. Nicholas, she gasped. I can't. It's too much. Yes, you can, he murmured against her lips. Give me everything, Natalie. Every part. I've got you. And with those words she shattered. The orgasm hit her in waves, making her scream his name, not caring if anyone heard, not caring about anything but that moment, that man, that feeling of finally being complete. Nicholas followed moments later, her name a hoarse cry torn from the depths of his soul. They collapsed together, bodies intertwined, breathing ragged, hearts beating like drums. For a long moment, no one spoke. There were no words for what had happened. It was bigger than language, deeper than explanation. Finally, Nicholas pulled back just enough to look at her face. Natalie had tears running down her temples. Did I hurt you? He asked immediately, concern darkening his eyes. She shook her head, smiling through the tears. No, you fixed me. He kissed each tear, one at a time. You fixed me first, he whispered. He pulled her to his side, arranging her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her protectively. She traced lazy patterns over his skin, feeling his breathing slow. Nicholas, she said after a moment. I love you. He went still, and then, slowly, he turned her so he could look into her eyes. Say it again, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I love you, she repeated, firmer now. I think I always have, since that train, since that first look. His eyes shone with something that might have been tears. I love you so much it hurts, he confessed. I love you in a way that scares me, in a way I didn't know was possible. Don't be scared, she whispered, kissing his chest right over his heart. We'll face it together. Everything. Always. Always, he repeated, like an oath. They made love twice more that night, once with the moon witnessing through the window, and another when the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky pink and gold. And when they finally slept, intertwined like vines, both knew with absolute certainty. There was no going back. They were one, and always would be. 3 weeks had passed since that night. 3 weeks in which Nicholas and Natalie existed in a perfect bubble of happiness. He had officially moved into her house. There was no point in keeping two places when everything he wanted was there, with her, with Oliver, building something that finally felt real. Mornings were full of coffee and laughter. Afternoons were spent at the cafe, where Nicholas now occasionally helped, making customers laugh when he tried, and failed miserably, at latte art. Nights were theirs after Oliver slept, when they lost themselves in each other repeatedly, as if each time were the first and the last. It was perfect. Until it wasn't. The afternoon started normally. Natalie was at the cafe, Nicholas had gone to pick up Oliver from school, and they had plans to have dinner together. Maybe pizza again, because Oliver had developed an obsession. Nicholas was helping Oliver with homework at the kitchen table when the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," Nicholas said, ruffling the boy's hair as he stood up. He opened the door without thinking, without checking, without suspecting, and came face to face with a man he'd never seen, but recognized immediately. Marcus. The man was shorter than Nicholas, with narrower shoulders and a posture that tried to seem confident, but was just arrogant. Greasy blonde hair, light eyes that had a disturbing coldness. He wore worn jeans and a leather jacket that had seen better days. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus asked, his voice harsh. Nicholas didn't answer immediately. He just studied the man in front of him, every muscle in his body going tense. So this is the coward who hurt her, who made her believe she was worthless. "I asked you a question," Marcus pressed, taking a step forward. "Who are you, and what are you doing at my woman's house?" "She's not your woman," Nicholas said, his voice low and dangerous. "Never was." Marcus laughed, an unpleasant sound that made Nicholas's skin crawl. "Oh, I get it. You're her new toy." He looked Nicholas up and down with disdain. "Expensive suit. Watch that costs more than my car, let me guess, and you're one of those rich idiots she seduced?" Nicholas's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice controlled. "You need to leave. Now." "Or what?" Marcus challenged. "This is her house, that's my son, and if I want to come in—" "You're not touching this house," Nicholas interrupted, blocking the entrance with his body. "And you're not getting anywhere near the boy." "My boy," Marcus corrected, his voice rising. "I have rights, I'm his father." "A father is someone who raises," Nicholas growled. "You're just the man who abandoned her when she needed you most." Marcus tried to push Nicholas, but it was like pushing a concrete wall. Nicholas didn't move an inch. "Get out of my way," Marcus hissed. "Make me," Nicholas retorted, each word a threat. That's when Oliver appeared behind Nicholas. "Nicholas, who is it?" Marcus looked over Nicholas's shoulder and saw the boy. His eyes widened and something, maybe remorse, maybe just curiosity, crossed his face. "Oliver," he said, his voice softer now. "Son, it's me, your father." Oliver hid behind Nicholas, clutching his pants. "I don't know you," the boy said, his voice trembling. The phrase hit Marcus like a slap. His expression hardened. "Of course you do. I'm your father. And this—" He pointed at Nicholas. "This person has no right to be here." "Nicholas is my friend," Oliver said firmly, even with fear in his voice. "And you're scary." "Go back inside, Oliver," Nicholas said gently, without taking his eyes off Marcus. "Now." Oliver hesitated, but obeyed, running back to the living room. As soon as the boy was out of sight, Nicholas took a step outside, closing the door behind him and forcing Marcus to step back. "You have exactly 5 seconds to leave this property before I call the police," Nicholas said, each word sharp as a blade. "You can't keep me from seeing my son," Marcus retorted, but there was less conviction in his voice now. "Watch me," Nicholas said, pulling his phone from his pocket. "Wait." Marcus raised his hands. Okay, I'll go. But this isn't over. I have rights, and I'll come back with lawyers if I need to." "Do that," Nicholas said coldly. "And I'll make sure you don't see a shadow of that boy or his mother for the rest of your miserable life." Marcus stepped back a few more steps, but his eyes were full of anger. "Who do you think you are?" "Someone who loves this family," Nicholas replied without hesitation. "Something you clearly never did." Marcus spat on the ground, one last gesture of defiance, before turning and walking back to an old car parked on the street. Nicholas stood there watching until the car disappeared completely. Only then did he allow his shoulders to relax slightly, but his hands still trembled, not from fear, from pure rage. He went back into the house and found Oliver sitting on the couch, hugging his teddy bear, his eyes wide. "Is he gone?" the boy asked in a small voice. "He's gone," Nicholas confirmed, sitting beside him. "And he won't come back, I promise." "Is he bad?" Oliver asked. Nicholas hesitated. He wanted to be honest, but also didn't want to scare the boy more. "He's confused," Nicholas said finally, "but you don't need to worry about him. I'm going to protect you. Always." Oliver threw himself into Nicholas's arms, and the man held him tight, closing his eyes. How could anyone abandon this? How could anyone leave this incredible child and his perfect mother? That's how Natalie found them 30 minutes later. She had closed the cafe early, feeling an inexplicable restlessness that pushed her home. When she walked in and saw Nicholas holding Oliver on the couch, both with serious expressions, her heart sank. "What happened?" she asked, dropping her bag. Oliver jumped off the couch and ran to her. "Mommy, that man came here saying he was my father, but Nicholas made him leave." Natalie's blood froze. "What man?" she asked, but already knew the answer. Nicholas stood up, his jaw tense. "Marcus was here." The name hung between them like a death sentence. Natalie felt her legs weaken. Nicholas crossed the room in 3 long strides and caught her before she fell. "Breathe," he murmured. "It's okay. He's gone. But he'll come back," she whispered, terror evident in her voice. "He always comes back. He won't give up." "Then I'll make sure he can't," Nicholas said with iron determination. "Legally, emotionally, whatever way is necessary. He's not getting near you or Oliver again." Natalie looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand. He's dangerous. He doesn't use physical violence, but he destroys, with words, with manipulation. He'll try to take Oliver from me. He'll say I'm unfit. He won't," Nicholas interrupted, holding her face with both hands. "Because I'm going to fight for you. I'll use every resource I have, every connection, every penny, and he won't win, Natalie. I promise." "Why?" she sobbed. "Why would you do this?" "Because I love you," he said simply. "Love both of you. And no one is going to hurt you while I'm alive." She threw herself into his arms, crying against his chest. He held her tight, one hand stroking her hair, the other firm on her back. Oliver watched, confused but sensing the gravity of the moment. "Is everything okay, Mommy?" he asked in a small voice. Natalie crouched down and opened her arms. Oliver ran to her, and the 3 of them stood there, embraced in the middle of the room. A family, imperfect, scared, but united. That night, after Oliver finally fell asleep, emotionally and physically exhausted, Nicholas and Natalie sat on the couch in silence. "I'm scared," she finally admitted. "Me too," he confessed, "but not of Marcus. I'm scared of losing you, of losing this, of losing you both." She looked at him, her eyes still red from crying. "You won't lose us." "How can you be sure?" "Because you already proved it," she said, touching his face. "You stayed when it was hard, when it was scary, you stayed. And that means everything." He kissed her palm. "I'm going to hire the best lawyers. I'll make sure he doesn't have a shadow of a chance in court." "What if it's not enough?" "It will be," he promised, "because I won't give up. Never." They lay on the couch, intertwined, silence wrapping around them like a blanket. And despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, both felt something stronger than any threat. Love. A love that didn't back down in the face of danger. A love that stayed. A love that fought. 6 months later. 6 months of legal battles, of sleepless nights, of fear and uncertainty, but also 6 months of unwavering love, of a family growing stronger, of roots deepening. Nicholas had kept his promise. He'd hired the best family lawyers money could buy, had gathered evidence of Marcus's negligence, had demonstrated beyond a shadow of doubt that Natalie was an extraordinary mother and that Oliver was thriving under her care. Marcus had tried to fight, had shown up at hearings with cheap lawyers and weak arguments, had tried to paint Nicholas as an intruder, Natalie as an unstable woman. But truth had a way of emerging. In the end, the judge had been clear. Marcus had no rights over Oliver. He had abandoned the child, hadn't paid child support, hadn't shown any real interest until he learned there was money involved, because of course he'd found out who Nicholas was. The final ruling was a restraining order. Marcus couldn't come near Natalie or Oliver, couldn't contact them, couldn't even be in the same town without violating the order. It was over. And when Natalie received the news, she had collapsed in Nicholas's arms, not from sadness, but from pure relief. "It's over," she'd whispered, crying. "It's really over." "It's over," he'd agreed, kissing the top of her head. "You're free." But freedom was just the beginning. 3 months after that ruling, on a sunny spring afternoon, Nicholas had knelt in Natalie's cafe garden, surrounded by pink bougainvillea she'd planted because they were said to bring luck. Oliver was beside him, holding a small velvet box, and when Natalie had walked out the back door, wearing her work apron and with flour in her hair, she'd stopped abruptly. What's happening?" she'd asked, her voice trembling. "Mommy," Oliver had shouted, unable to contain his excitement. "Nicholas is going to ask you something." Nicholas had laughed, his eyes shining as he looked at the boy. "You had one job, buddy. Stay quiet." "Sorry," Oliver had whispered, but was grinning from ear to ear. Natalie had approached slowly, her hands trembling as she covered her mouth. Nicholas had taken the box from Oliver's hands and opened it, revealing a simple but stunning ring, a solitaire stone that caught the sunlight as if it had been made just for this moment. "Natalie," Nicholas had begun, his voice choked. "From the moment you got on that train, my life changed. You gave me something I didn't even know I was looking for. Peace, joy, home, and Oliver." He'd looked at the boy, who watched with wide eyes. "He gave me the chance to be something I never thought I could be, a father." Tears had started streaming down Natalie's face. "I can't promise I'll be perfect," Nicholas had continued. "I'm going to mess things up. I'm going to irritate you. I'm going to burn dinners and forget important dates. But I can promise this: I'll love you every day. I'll choose you every day. I'll stay, no matter how hard it gets. Because you're worth every second, Natalie. You both are worth everything." He'd taken a deep breath. "So, Natalie Williams, it's will you marry me?" She'd fallen to her knees in front of him, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes," she'd sobbed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Oliver had shouted with joy, jumping between them, and the three had laughed and cried and hugged in the flower-filled garden. And now, 3 months after that, they were here, in the same garden, surrounded by the same bougainvillea. But this time, there were white chairs arranged in rows. There was a small arch covered in flowers. There were friends, few but meaningful. There was Oliver wearing his first suit, proud to be the ring-bearer, and there was Natalie walking down the makeshift aisle, wearing a simple ivory dress that made her look ethereal. Nicholas waited for her at the altar, and when their eyes met, he had to blink several times to push away the tears. She was his. Finally, officially, forever his. The ceremony was short, simple, perfect. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Oliver had raised his hand, making everyone laugh. "I object to having to wait any longer to eat cake," he'd announced, and the tension had dissolved into laughter. And when Nicholas finally kissed his bride, his wife, it was like sealing a pact not just with her but with the universe. This is real. This is forever. The reception was at the cafe, decorated with fairy lights and wildflowers. They ate, drank, danced. Oliver had commanded the dance floor, doing ridiculous moves that had made everyone laugh until it hurt. But when night began to fall and guests started to leave, Nicholas pulled Natalie aside. "Come with me," he whispered. He took her to a room, not the small bedroom at her house, but a room he'd secretly prepared at a nearby inn. Oliver would stay with a friend that night. It was their night. When they entered the room, Natalie gasped. There were candles everywhere, rose petals on the floor, and the window was open, letting the gentle night breeze in, bringing the smell of the sea. "Nicholas," she began, but he silenced her with a kiss. "This is our night," he murmured against her lips. "Just ours." He picked her up, making her laugh and protest that she was too heavy, and carried her to the bed, placing her carefully on the white sheets. "You're beautiful," he said, tracing her face with his fingers. "The most beautiful woman I've ever seen." "And you," she replied, touching his chest, "have the most beautiful heart I've ever known." They made love slowly that night. There was no urgency, no desperation, just reverence. Just two bodies that knew each other so well, two souls that had found each other against all odds. Nicholas kissed every inch of her, her shoulders, the curve of her breasts, her stomach, her thighs, worshipped her as if she was sacred. And when they finally joined, it was like the first time and the 1,000th time at once. Familiar yet always new, safe yet always exciting. Natalie moaned his name when pleasure built, her nails lightly scratching his back. "I love you," she gasped. "God, I love you so much." "I love you more," he replied, the rhythm increasing. "There's no one but you. There never will be." They reached climax together, each other's names a cry and a prayer on their lips. And afterward, lying intertwined, with the night wind caressing their sweaty skin, Nicholas turned Natalie to her side so he could look into her eyes. "You changed me," he said quietly. "I was an empty man before you. Rich, powerful, but empty. And you filled me, gave me purpose, gave me love, gave me a family." Natalie had tears in her eyes again. "You saw me," she whispered, "when I couldn't even see myself. You made me believe I was worth something, that I deserved to be loved, that I deserved more." "You always deserved it," he said fiercely. "Always." They slept embraced, the sound of distant waves lulling them. And when they woke the next morning, with sun streaming through the window and the smell of coffee being brewed downstairs at the inn, both smiled. "Good morning, wife," Nicholas said, kissing her shoulder. "Good morning, husband," she replied, turning to really kiss him. And in that simple moment, without drama, without fear, without pain, they knew. They had made it, against all odds, against all obstacles, against a past that tried to destroy them. They had found home in each other, and it was forever. 2 years later they stood in the same garden, now with an addition. A small girl with curly brown hair and dark eyes like her father's ran among the bougainvillea, laughing as Oliver chased her. Natalie was pregnant again. Only 3 months, but Nicholas already had his protective hand over her belly. "Happy?" he asked, kissing her temple. "More than I thought possible," she replied, leaning into him. And as they watched their children play in the garden that had witnessed so much, pain, healing, love, beginnings, both knew with absolute certainty. Sometimes life doesn't give second chances, but when it does, they're worth every second of waiting. And love, true, deep, unwavering love, always finds a way. Always. Sometimes life puts us on trains we didn't plan to take, introduces us to people we weren't looking for, offers us loves we thought impossible. Natalie got on that train trying to escape the past. Nicholas was there, trapped in an empty present. But when their eyes met, something awakened, something that 4 years of distance couldn't erase. They learned that true love isn't in a hurry, that sometimes you need to break completely to rebuild yourself alongside the right person. That family isn't just blood. It's choice, it's fight, it's staying when it would be easier to leave. And maybe the greatest lesson is this: sometimes all someone needs is to be seen, really seen. And in the end, this story is also about us, about everyone who still believes there's someone out there waiting to see us exactly as we are. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, click the super thanks button too. Comment where you're listening from. We love knowing where you're listening from.